I'm standing on the corner of Berwick Street in the heart of Soho, and as you see behind me a pub called the Blue Posts, a proper London boozer it calls itself. Now, a little tip, right? If you see a pub called the Blue Posts, and there's actually 3 in central London in the Soho area, you're standing by a Georgian taxi rank, because Blue Posts were the sign for sedan chairs, which are those chairs where you had a bloke at the front and a bloke behind you and a chair in the middle, and the well-heeled would stand here and go, "Oi, sedan chair, I'll have one," by the Blue Posts. So that's why it's called the Blue Posts. Right, we're in Berwick Street, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the war in Berwick Street. I'm going to tell you about 1939 to 1945 and why Berwick Street was important for Londoners. Now, let's paint a picture. 1940, you've got Nazis above us trying to drop bombs on our heads. You've got rationing. Rationing was brought in January 1940. You've got a war economy, which means the government is basically managing everything. People are hungry. Londoners are really under the cosh. And so they started pulling scams and swizzes, and that's why we are in Berwick Street, because although today the market is full of lovely food, great value clothing, etc., back in the day, Berwick Street was known as a place that you could get a little bit black market goods here and there. So let's go through some of the scams Londoners pulled. The black market in luxury goods was thriving. Because of the war, people couldn't get hold of all their tidbits and stuff they liked. Now, Allied servicemen used to come from abroad, and they used to smuggle loads of stuff in, but how did they fence it? This is a lovely story. An elderly butler was given the keys to a Chelsea townhouse, a posh townhouse in Chelsea. The lord and lady who owned it had gone to live in their place in the Cotswolds. They weren't going to stay in London during the duration, and they knew they could trust elderly Albert the butler with the keys to their mansion. Albert had this whiz. It became basically a central London clearinghouse for everything Allied, cheers man, everything Allied servicemen smuggled in. And what he'd do is they'd come in through the back door, they'd take, bottles of whiskey, whatever, stockings, nylons, cosmetics. He'd pay them for them. Then butlers from posh houses would come in through the front door, and on his butlers network, he'd flog all the goods the Allied servicemen had brought in. So that was one element of the black market. Lots of Londoners were bombed out, and there was some looting, but looting was massively frowned upon. It was frowned upon by, obviously, the beaks. The magistrates would give you hard labour. You get a minimum of a year hard labour if you were caught looting houses. But also, socially, it was completely unacceptable, yeah? You've just been bombed out. The last thing you want is some scoundrel going through your drawers, don't you? So that was frowned upon, and there wasn't actually too much looting. However, the blackout caused loads of problems for the police, and they reckon that there was a huge rise in things like grabbing people's hands, snatch crimes, grabbing people's bags and running off, and also a huge rise in smash and grabs, knocking through windows and running off. The police reckoned that out of every 100 blackout crimes which were committed, they solved 3, which shows how bad it was. There were some other crimes which were committed which might not immediately spring to mind. If a German plane got shot down and crashed, you weren't allowed to take any fragments. Now, the kids used to run out and get bits of bombs and bits of planes. You weren't allowed to take them away from the crash site because the RAF said experts need to pick up every single bit because we might find some secret German technology if we did so. Now, the other reason London was full of crime during the war was because there were lots of deserters. Get this, they reckon there was 20,000 servicemen hiding out in London at any one time. 20,000 people living under the radar, which obviously they needed to find a way of supporting themselves, which meant there were 20,000 gangsters on our streets. I'm going to tell you the story about the fur coat robbers of the Second World War. Now, no fur coats were made in Britain. For 5 whole years, all the material was being sent to the war effort to make nice, cosy uniforms for our brave men fighting in the Atlantic convoys, etc. It meant lots of people wanted fur coats. And the answer came to a lady called Kitty Marshall and her conspirator, Queenie Day. Now, what they used to do is follow rich ladies home from the West End to their houses in St John's Wood and Hampstead, and then go and break in and steal their fur coats. They were finally caught by 2 police officers clambering out of a window in Christchurch Square up in Hampstead, armed with all these fur coats they'd stolen. When they got nicked, they were taken back to their house with a warrant, which is just around the corner from here, and they found 300 fur coats, 300 stolen fur coats. Now, Kitty Marshall had tried to go straight. She got married to a chap called George Marshall, who was a garage mechanic, and George was giving evidence in her trial and said that he had made her go straight, but when he lost her job, she started going back on the rob. The newspaper article I read about this couple of fur coat robbers ended with George saying that the day she was sentenced, he went to sign up for the army, and he ended up going and fighting with Monty in the 8th Army in the North African campaign. Came home safely, waited for her to get out of prison, lived happily ever after. Rationing came in January 1940, and very quickly London gangsters realised that they were really cheaply produced. They didn't have any watermarks, they weren't like the Royal Mint's banknotes. You could just run them off. So along Shaftesbury Avenue, in the offices behind Shaftesbury Avenue, gang of crooks set up an illicit printing press. It only lasted a couple of months because although it was easy to run these coupons off, it was actually easier just to steal them. So they got in touch with clerks at every town hall in London, and they basically pinched them. Now, as well as pinching them from the clerks, you could pinch them originally from the printers were all on the take, but also, get this, once a shopkeeper had taken his ration cards, what did he do with them? He'd take them to the post office to redeem them. The post office would send them back to the War Office in Whitehall. The post office staff refused to count the coupons. They said, right, I'm getting all these ration things in, it's not our job description to count them, we're just going to bung them in a sack and send them back. So there was no way of telling how many coupons came in, so post office staff used to take a handful home with them and sell them on to the gangsters. So coupons was a really, really big thing. Other scams Londoners got up to now. I came across a man called Jack Brack. Jack Brack was a tailor, and he was called up. He was called up to go and fight for the army. And so he went for his medical. Now, Jack had a heart condition, and he was quite pleased to discover he'd had a heart condition because he didn't want to go and fight. So he got discharge, medical discharge, a little form they filled out, gave it to him. And he suddenly realised that he could go and do this multiple times. So Jack Brack basically sold himself. If you've been called up, get your call up cards, you've got to go and have a medical, what you do is you go to Jack and say, I really don't want to fight, go for me. So Jack would take a tenner off you, he'd go to the medical, they'd say, yeah, you're clearly not fit for service, you've got a heart condition. He'd fill out the form and he'd come back with a medical discharge for you. Now, he earned about 500 quid doing that in 1 month before the police clocked on that it was the same man coming back time and time again with the same irregular heartbeat. Quite a cool scam. So another scam was knocking off warehouses and depots. Now, think about it, right? You're going to employ a night watchman, but it's during the war. If I was going to employ a night watchman, I'd like some 25-year-old burly lad who can see off any robbers. Problem is, they've all signed up for the duration to go and fight the Nazis. So the only night watchman you could get hold of was, you know, shallow-faced 14-year-olds or people over 65. Hardened criminals weren't going to be scared of them. So there was a real thing about people going and nicking clothes from depots. And what they used to do is then they'd take the clothes they'd stolen to a clothes shop down the West End, and they go up to a clothes shop and say, look, I've got 400 pairs of khaki trousers to sell you. You want them? Yeah, okay, I'll have them. Obviously off the back of a lorry. So they'd sell them to the clothes shop, and then the following night would go back and steal the lot. And the shopkeeper had no recourse because he couldn't go to the old bill and say, someone's come in and nicked a load of stolen goods off me. I came across a story of a man called Thomas Maguire. He was 28 years old and he'd ran away from the South Staffordshire Regiment. He was nicked, having stolen from a warehouse in New Cavendish Street, 680 yards of suit material, 8 coats, and what the police described as 1 costume. I'm enthralled to it. I wonder what this 1 costume was. But also I've got this image of old Maguire, this South Staffordshire soldier, running down the road with 680 yards of material. Incredible how he got away with it, or didn't, as the case may be. Right, so Berwick Street. Now, why Berwick Street was such a good place for people to fence stolen goods? One of the reasons why, it was right by Rainbow Corner. Now, Rainbow Corner was a place in Shaftesbury Avenue, which was a GI's club, so all the American servicemen would go there. At its entrance, it had a sign pointing to Berlin, saying 600 miles to Berlin that way. New York, 3,270 miles in that direction. They had a dance hall for people to go and do some jitterbugging. They had a billiards room, they had table tennis, they had pin tables, they had a shoe shine area. They even had a letter writing service. So for the GI who wanted to express their love for their They're heartbroken, love her back home. You could even get them to write you love letters. But it was also a place where they basically traded their cigarettes. And so they go there, they do loads of trading, and then they come down Berwick Street. They always find a dodgy Cockney market stall owner who could flog off the nylons they got. Lipstick was always a big thing, and I read a report of a theft of £5,500 worth of lippy from a shop just round the corner here, Great Titchfield Street, and it all ended up on Berwick Street Market. Apparently all the shop girls had particularly red lips for that month. Another scam, I'm going to tell you about a man called Lewis Bennett. Now Lewis Bennett had been in the Royal Navy. He'd been on the Atlantic convoys. He didn't like it at all. No wonder. You've got Germans trying to bomb you, it's freezing cold, you're heading through the Arctic. Not a pleasant way to spend your days. What did he do? He deserted, and he came up with something known as the notorious suitcase scam. So his plan was, he realised that lots and lots and lots of luggage was being brought into central London stations, and what you do is, this is back in the days of the service economy, yeah? You get your suitcase, you give it to a porter, and the porter would put it in the guard's van for the duration. When you got to your destination, the porters would come to the guard's van, they look at the address on the suitcase, they put it on a horse and cart, and it would go straight to your door. So you didn't have to carry any of your luggage home from train stations. Now our man, Mr. Bennett, the Royal Navy runaway reservist, realised this. So what he would do is get on a train with a whole load of fake addresses, get into the guard's van, and he would write, "These suitcases need to be directed to a Ms. Annie Harris of Islington High Street." The porters would take all the suitcases to Miss Annie Harris at Islington High Street, where our man Mr. Bennett would be waiting, and he'd do a little runner with them. He was nicked and charged with having £7,000 worth of stolen goods. Now let's rewind, this is 1940. £7,000 worth of stolen goods is about £250,000 worth. The guy was successful, he was prolific, but he did get nicked. Crime did not pay.